I'm Stacey Holmes, and this is Glordinary, a few moments where we celebrate God's glory and champion the ordinary. I'm glad you're here. Years and years and years ago, my husband John and I pastored a small group of teenagers here in our town. Now, we're entirely too old for this type of prison sentence. I mean, active service. I meant to say active service. Yeah, I'm joking. We loved those kiddos like they were our own. But there's one week that stands out even now, 2+ decades later. Well, truthfully, I actually can't tell you much about that night other than we probably went to Taco Bell per usual afterward. Are you even working with teens if you aren't eating a Crunch Wrap entirely too late at night? But what I can tell you is the illustration we used as we cracked open the word that night, a Q-tip. And as I handed out a Q-tip to every one of them, I encouraged our teens that every day you need a Q-tip. Now, honestly, the way some of those teen boys were coming into puberty, they needed a lot more than a Q-tip. But that night, I shared with each teen that every day you need a Q-tip, meaning a quiet time in his presence, QTIP. All right, I know there's not technically an H in Q-tip for quiet time in his presence. Just go with me here. I'm pretty sure the H is silent. Now, it's been almost 25 years, but I still remember that every day I need a Q-tip. I need a quiet time in his presence to clean out my ears from the noise of this world, that I can hear what God's revealing, to get out the gunk, the buildup of culture's lies that stick all too easily in my ears like a waxy film over my mind, to clean those unseen places hidden deep within, because every day you need a Q-tip, a quiet time in his presence to hear what God's revealing, which works out because every single moment of every single day, God is revealing himself, which is exactly what we've been talking about in our series, Gets My Goat, how to actually read the word. Now, we're about at the halfway point of our conversations, and friend, let's just call it menopause brain, but sometimes I gotta pause and say, what were we talking about again? Actually, it's kind of embarrassing how often I hear myself saying that. So at the midway point, I thought it might be helpful for you and for me to quickly remind ourselves what we're talking about in the first place. Oh, right, how to actually read the word. Now, we've already chatted about how God is always revealing himself, specifically through creation. That's general revelation. But he's also revealing himself through the Bible, his word. And that's special revelation. But in order to understand God's word, we've got to attempt to understand what was said to them, the original listeners. This is our starting place, because as we're discovering, quote, God's word to us was first of all his word to them, end quote. Thank you, Gordon Fee and Douglas Stewart, authors of How to Study the Bible for All It's Worth. So to discover what God's word meant to them, we need to employ some good exegesis. EXEGESIS, exegesis, which is really just fancy for what did it mean to them and what did it mean then and there. This is our starting point, and always our starting point, to actually read the word. But let's be real. Probably most of us read through the lens of, what does this mean to me? And how do I apply this to me here and now? However, that's kind of like using a Q-tip backward, and we're just shoving our waxy ears onto the Q-tip. Ouch. Not exactly helpful and quite possibly harmful in the process. So to actually read the word, we need to start with some good, sound exegesis. We do this by asking questions of the text because context matters. We look at the historical context, our who, what, when, where, why questions, and we look at the literary context of the larger chapter, section, book as a whole. You know, like, what's the author saying here and what's the point? Okay, Stace, you kind of make that sound like it's super simple, and it really can be, with the right tools, meaning a good modern translation of the word. Now, you might have noticed there's a slew of translations for a complete English Bible, meaning an Old and New Testament. And by slew, I mean something like 150 plus translations. Yeah, it's kind of a lot. So which one is the best translation to use to actually read the word? Well, there isn't a cut and dry answer to that question. Sorry, but we gotta zoom out once again. So let me break it down like this. Bible translations are really on more of a spectrum. It's a continuum, really, between two major categories. At one end is the literal, word-for-word translation from Greek or Hebrew into English. We call this formal equivalence. But on the other end of the spectrum is more of a dynamic thought-for-thought translation from the Greek or Hebrew into modern English vernacular. And this is what we'd call functional equivalence. Suffice it to say, on the literal word-for-word end is where we'll find translations like the New American Standard Bible, the English Standard Version, and the King James Version. In the central portion, but moving more towards thought for thought, you'll see versions like the New International Version or today's New International Version. And at the end of our spectrum, we find dynamic thought for thought translation, which represents the New Living Translation or the Good News Bible. And one more, just for funsies, at the most extreme right is what we'd call a free translation or a paraphrase. And this is where you'll find the Living Bible or the Message. So, to review, literal word for word on the far left, dynamic thought for thought on the far right, with free translations or paraphrases on the extreme far right. I know, far left, far right. These are just spatial descriptors, folks. We're not talking donkeys and elephants, so don't go all CNN and Fox News on me here. I can link a continuum photo in the show notes for reference if you really want to nerd out together with me. So Stace, which translation is best? What one should I read? Well, there's not a right answer, so read the one you'll read. I don't read the King James Version every day for a couple of reasons, but a big one is the same reason that I don't read Shakespeare. Thou doth not like it, so thou won't readeth it dailyeth. My preference in everyday Bible is the NIV because it's going to land centrally on that continuum. It avoids the literal word for word that sometimes just doesn't translate as understandable in modern English. But the NIV also steers clear of the extreme freedom that a paraphrase takes by updating the original author's language and putting it into colloquial English. Friend, we could spend oodles more time chatting this up, but since my coffee cups runneth dry, why don't you join me back here tomorrow? We'll take an up-close look at how those translations differ. We'll pull back the curtain on a few scriptures just to get a peek at some of those differences. But seriously, Stace, come on. Does any of this really matter? Well, you tell me. Almost a decade ago now, I bumped into one of those former teenagers at a church service one weekend. It was such a sweet little gift to see one of our first quote-unquote kids. And we sat together that day when we saw each other, and all of a sudden, in the middle of that service, she leaned over, opened up her Bible, and pulled out one sad-looking Q-tip tucked between the pages. She smiled at me and whispered, "Every day you need a Q-tip." She's not wrong, friend. Quality time in his presence. So let's do it the best way possible with a whole new Q-tip acronym for how to actually read the word. Let's start with Q, questions. Ask good questions about the then and there. What did it mean to them? T, tools. A good modern Bible translation and a Bible dictionary are my go-to, but more on this in our bonus episode tomorrow. I, interpretation. We'll get here next week. What's the meaning of this text here and now? What timeless truths can we see about God, His character, His promises, His ways? And P, practice. How do I put what I've read into practice? And how do I make it practicable day after day after day, like a Q-tip? Questions, tools, interpretation, practice. Because every day you need a Q-tip, and so do I. See you tomorrow. Remember, you're not alone in this. I'm praying for you, friend. Have a glordinary day.